everyone. Thank you so much for your patience while we got some technical issues sorted. I am going to let Leis introduce the panel, what we're here for. He's going to basically tell you why we're doing this event, and I just want to thank him for being the host of this. We're so fortunate to have him as a member of our community and to have Neir's Tavern. So Leis, please let us know why this is important to Neir's.
Hi, guys. So first of all, welcome. This is a really, really important topic that has actually touched home to me personally. A lot of people have promoted different things because it sounds like it's the right thing to do. I like to touch base with things that actually have really affected me in a personal way. And mental health awareness is one of those things. First of all, I would like to at least get real about the people that are making the real difference. I own this business for about 12 years now, and our main way of staying alive is selling burgers and beers, right? However, I've learned there's something more powerful than selling more burgers and beers. There's the people that you touch and the people that are affected by your business. I've hosted several different fundraisers for customers that are just not customers, they become friends. CJ, for example, who had childhood leukemia, and we did a big golf outing. We had a great time. So it's been a channel for and a vehicle for change to really touch base with causes that are important to us. And yes, we do have to sell burgers and beers to stay open, but it's important to also be cognizant that the customers are not customers anymore. They have become friends. And I've learned that there are people that are suffering from mental illness that has gone unrecognized or not highlighted and become this thing nobody really wants to speak about. And I learned firsthand about one of my good friends that unfortunately, he lost his life. He didn't seek the proper help, and I blame myself. For a long time, I did, because I remember the last words he says to me was, everything is gonna be okay. Like, I'm not sure if he was telling me everything was gonna be okay or was he asking me, and it was just ambiguous. And I found out he was actually asking me, and I couldn't give him the answer because I wasn't sure what he was saying until he didn't show up to my wedding. And he didn't show up to my wedding because later on I got a call that they found him hanging in his living room. And that touched me for a long time. And it was very hard for me to wrap my mind around what happened. What did I do wrong? Like, what was the problem? This is my friend. I should have known something. Why did it get that bad? And all these questions over the years and years and years until my wife, who's also a psychotherapist, she's probably my therapist too. She's doing a great job with people that have a whole range of different issues that we all suffer from. And she started to talk to me more and more about this. And as I'm learning this, I said, listen, I have a business. What can I do besides selling more burgers and beer to highlight these things that are really important? And this is part of that initiative. I couldn't do everything. Why? Because I have so much stuff going on. But then this Neir's Ambassador community group started to sprung up outside of the Neir's 200, people that really are the most passionate customer community for New York City's oldest bar. And they felt the same thing I did. We want to do more than just buy burgers and take out and everything. We want to really contribute in a meaningful way by creating a meaningful experiences and events that highlight things that we care about. And so Joanna has become and rise to the top of become one of our most important Neir's Tavern ambassadors. It's the arm of Neir's Tavern, of New York City's oldest bar, that believe there are more important things in life than trying to push the next sale. There are things that are priceless. And so she's taken her on herself to push that when I can't because I don't have enough time. I have to figure out this business thing in this pandemic. And so for that, I really want to thank her for taking the lead in this. And it's really been the most, the biggest example for all the 6,000 people that follow us on social media and the other 5,000 that follow us on Instagram to say, hey, this is the cream of the crop. This is besides, she buys her burgers and beers and she tries all this stuff, but you know what? This is important to her as well, and also as me. So for that, I really want to thank her and all the entire Neir's Tavern ambassadors, and of course the Neir's 200 that are planning our street renaming coming October. So for that, I really want to get to the actual highlighting of this issue. We have some all-star panels. When I started seeing the names, I'm like, oh my God, they're actually want to talk about it. These are like real credible people. So I see Helen here, I see Joseph here, Mr. Joseph Smith, Pastor Green is here, Donna, who's an incredible human being. I see all people here that should be speaking on this, and so I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn and I'm here to listen. So I'll be here the whole time listening and learning, that I could let other people know what I've learned today and pass it on. So that's what I have to say. I'm going to shut up now. And Joanna, I'm going to allow you to take over and really do what you do best. Incredible host, incredible organizer. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you everyone for joining. I'm a communications specialist. I work on social impact issues, and I've been doing it for the past decade. I've worked on mental health issues in the past. I've worked with NAMI before. So this is an area that's near and dear to my heart. And I'm just so grateful that all these panelists can be with us today. So thank you so much. I'm gonna let them get right into it and introduce themselves, and then we'll go right into the questions. There will be a Q&A, so please feel free to definitely put your questions in the chat. We will get to them later. And also the panelists have been very generous with their time to be on this call, but also after the call, they've gave me all their contact information to share, which you will see in the chat. Feel free to reach out to them via email or phone. They've been very generous with their time, and they are a great resource, so please reach out to them. So to start off with introductions, I will go to Ellen.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Leis and Neir's Tavern, for having not only this event, but it sounds like you've had some incredible events in the past. How wonderful. To care about the community so much is to supply these things. So I'm Ellen Ritz. Okay, I apologize, there's something right in front of me. So I'm Ellen Ritz. I guess the first thing I am is a nurse. I guess a mom and a wife and all kinds of things, but I'm actually here about mental health. I started my career at Columbia after graduating. I was in Bellevue emergency room, and I ran the trauma unit. Then I was intensive care and ran the clinics after that at Mount Sinai and taught about diabetes. So in part of everything that we all do is mental health and psychology, right? All of our relationships, our connections, our work, our friends, you know, our primary relationships all involve that. And I came to NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, through a friend whose husband, actually another nurse, whose husband was dealing with bipolar. And she said, you want to come to NAMI? And I said, what's NAMI? Anyway, it started my life down this road. And I just want to say a couple of things about NAMI. All our programs, classes, support groups are free. Our mission is to support, educate, and advocate for people struggling with mental health disorders, as well as anybody who touches their lives, including their families. Families are really important of how you support, help somebody. And then certainly legislators, faith leaders, which we're very involved in supporting faith leaders, FaithNet Committee, which we're so lucky to have Pastor Green here, as well as policemen, teachers, students. So I just don't want to take up too much time, but thank you for having me. And I know that we'll get to know each other better with the questions. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. And I would like to now introduce Pastor Green to give a couple words about himself.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be. I thank you for inviting me. I'm Pastor Jerry Green. I'm the pastor of Hollis Avenue Congregational Church, which is located in Queens Village, New York. I've been pastoring for almost 15 years at that church. I've been in ministry over 29 years, and it's been a blessing. One of the reasons I'm sort of here tonight is I got involved with NAMI, and also being a retired New York City correction officer for 21 years, and having a daughter that's a sergeant on the New York City Police Department and a son-in-law that's a retired detective, when we started looking at the issues dealing with mental health, we realized that the agencies that we work for, the ministry that I'm in, we don't have a grasp on it. And so we needed to sit down and figure out, how can we help? How can we be of some significant importance? And by being part of the group, I learned things that I did not know before. And so I'm here to try to share that information. I have a lovely wife, 3 children, and only thing I can say is I thank you for inviting me tonight. And hopefully when we finish with this meeting, we can get this message out to others so that we can deal with this mental health issue, not only just in our own little communities, but spread it throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Green. You have such a unique perspective that we will have, it'll be absolutely invaluable. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Dr. Smith, if you could give some words about yourself, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be a part of this panel. As Ellen said, this is a wonderful thing that you're doing. You're sponsoring this and so many other programs that you've done and will continue to do. So I'm happy to be a part of it. Again, my name is Dr. Joseph Smith. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been the executive director of Long Island Reach, which is a multi-service, community-based, not-for-profit organization. We have 3 locations. The main location is in Long Beach, New York, and we have one in Port Washington and one in Franklin Square. So we provide an array of outpatient treatment services, including chemical dependency treatment and mental health treatment. We also have an alternative high school program for youngsters who've been unsuccessful and alienated within traditional educational systems. And so they've chosen to attend an alternative high school program that we operate. So it's a multi-service agency. We do criminal justice, juvenile justice counseling services, and case management, pregnancy prevention and services, counseling as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive agency. And certainly at this point in time, in the face of the pandemic that we're all faced with, the issue of mental health concerns, the issue of chemical dependency services and problems is something that I think we really do need to have a great deal of focus on. So I'm happy to be a part of this and look forward to hearing all the other presenters as well.
Thank you, and thank you for putting light on this issue with us. Donna, thank you for joining, fellow Neir's 200 ambassador. If you could just give us some information about yourself, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. I am retired now, but still very busy, as my husband and I are raising our 8-year-old granddaughter. And I, as many of you, suffer from mental health. And I went through so many years of distress and confusion, not understanding what was wrong with me. And about 30 years ago, I finally was able to get a complete diagnosis of major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and anxiety disorder. I'd like to help anybody to make them more aware to pursue help faster and not let as much time go by as I did. So I hope I can help in some way.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you to all the panelists again for joining us. So we're going to go right into the questions. The first one is, what are some of the psychological and emotional impacts resulting from the pandemic? And I think first we're going to hear from Dr. Smith.
Well, as I said before, this pandemic has been an extraordinary experience that's impacted everyone. We've had many disasters, natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, you name it, and they all have a profound impact on the people who've been affected. This is a worldwide pandemic. There is no corner of this earth that has not been affected. And there's no individual in any of our communities who has not been deeply impacted as a result of this pandemic. So it's something that I think, first of all, we all have to take a breath and say, this is an extraordinary experience, an extraordinary event, and it would be inhuman not to have an emotional reaction to it, not to be struggling in some way emotionally as a result of this pandemic. It is an extraordinary experience, and the impact has been profound. For many people, they are struggling with fear, first and foremost. What is this? What is it going to mean? What is it going to mean for me, for my family, for my community? What is it going to mean for the world? And so it's been unsettling. It has it's affected the entire foundation of our lives. And so again, it's an unusual circumstance, and so our responses to it may be absolutely normal given the abnormality of the event. And I think it's important that we recognize that and appreciate that. That being said, the consequences of this, in addition to all of the physical potential illness or the illness or loss of life that this pandemic has brought, there's also the fact that we've all been asked to do something that is also inhuman, which is to socially isolate. Part of what it means to be a human being is to be affiliative, to be interactive, to be connected. And what we've been asked to do and have had to do for all the public health reasons is to engage in social distancing. That's left many, many people feeling profoundly alone and isolated, disconnected, and feeling as if they're in this on their own. And of course, that has been necessary, but we have to attend not only to the physical, medical illness that COVID-19 represents, but also the fact that it has affected us all emotionally. Many people have experienced profound depression. Many people have experienced heightened anxiety. Many people have experienced anger and frustration, even rage. For those of us that struggle with those kinds of issues, those kinds of symptoms, this has exacerbated what was already a difficult struggle, a difficult situation for people. And so we need to remember that, and we need to be on the lookout for the kinds of things that will set off alarms, that will help to tell us that we're not alone, that many people struggle with these symptoms, and there is help that is available. Our organization, for example, has throughout this entire pandemic, but we had to leave our 4 offices, and our 70+ staff had to leave. We've all been working remotely, only now beginning to come back to the office and work in person. But through this entire time, we've provided telehealth services, and we've actually provided services at a greater level, greater volume than in the year before, because there are so many people who are reaching out, so many people who are struggling and want help and need help. We've been fortunate enough to be able to use technology to our advantage to be able to provide that help and that support. But again, I think that in answer to the question, every aspect of our lives have been affected and profoundly, but help is available, and it's important to recognize it and to be there for those of us that are touched by this, to know that there are others that we can reach out to, and that we can respond, and we can be helpful, and we can guide people to the services, to the help that is available for them.
Thank you. And Ellen, can you tell us a bit about the demand that you've seen at NAMI as a result of the pandemic?
Absolutely, because as Dr. Smith said, the loss of connection, of financial security, of loved ones have led to, and that connection and doing the things that we do with using our coping skills of being involved in going to work and the regular schedule has really thrown a lot of people into, increasing whatever they're struggling with. At NAMI, we have seen tremendous growth in our support groups. NAMI believes in supporting particularly families. How do they support somebody who's struggling? There are a major key in, and so we have classes, actual classes that teach about how families can support. And we're free, so the financial problem is not, relevant, thank goodness. And so I take crisis calls. I've had a lot more crisis calls, but understanding what you can do and what you can't do. You can't control somebody else, but how you respond and how you support. You can't control and you can't fix, right? But you can support and somebody, and that's a major, major thing that will also decrease sometimes the family's anxieties when they see somebody struggling, somebody in the family. And sometimes there's more than one person struggling. So I have seen a definite increase in our support groups, our classes, our programs. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. And I think you touched on something so important, like there's the individual struggle and then the family struggle. And I think, that's a really good segue into our next question where we talk about society. So what happens when the loss is on a greater scale throughout society? How do the faith and the mental health sectors adapt and cope with this scale of loss and change? And Reverend, we're hoping you could start us off on this conversation.
Okay. When I looked at that question, I saw that Dr. Smith said in his comment about fear. With such a great loss, we've seen society have so much fear within it. People did not realize what was happening. They were not ready to confront what was in front of them. And it fell back onto the faith community. Did I do something wrong? What's going on? And how do we talk to them dealing with their faith and their fear? And so we realized that we had to sit back and join together. We came together with different organizations and we had to reach out and say, we need help also. We had to kind of tell people, it's all right to get help outside of your faith, okay? When you're dealing with that loss, when you're calling your pastor, or your rabbi, or your imam, and someone's dying at the hospital and no one can go there to see them, how do we comfort that family? So we realized that we had to let that family know that, to reassure them of their faith, to let them know that we were going to walk through that process while they were grieving, and it was okay to grieve and okay to cry, and it was okay we were there. And we also had to let them know that not to feel guilty. I think someone said not to feel guilty in a sense of that they could not reach out, or the church could not be there, or the synagogue could not be there, not to feel guilty and to just trust in their faith and their beliefs. So we had to come together and comfort them. And then I think I learned from my own experience that I had to find another avenue, someplace to direct them. And that's when NAMI came in for me, because I think within the religious faith, we need to tell somebody, we'll pray for you, but let me direct you to somebody else. And that helped tremendously when people came back and said, I'm so glad that you told me that we can reach out. So I think with the amount of loss that was there, and I think it also had an impact on the leaders of these faith organizations, because we had never dealt with anything. You on a Monday, you get a call, somebody passed. On a Tuesday, you get a call, somebody passed, and you're trying to be there for them. So I think in one aspect, I think that it's something that we never faced before, but I think if all of the organizations reach together, and I think we need to talk about it and talk about death itself, and talk about living itself. And I think that helped a lot. And I think that's what we can do within the faith community. Talk about it, let people express what they're going through, and not have to have them hide within themselves and be afraid to express their fear or their loss of faith.
Thank you, Pastor Green. And Dr. Smith, you mentioned previously how you had to change your operations and do telehealth. How is the mental health sector changing on a whole as a result of the pandemic?
Well, I think that was the most, maybe the one good thing that's come out of this from the mental health system perspective, which is that we did have to pivot and do it quickly and do it efficiently. And so telehealth has become, I think, recognized more and more as a resource that should continue to be available beyond the tragedy, beyond the pandemic. When we first we had the executive order that basically said we had to close our offices, and we made the decision at that point that we were going to, engage our staff in telehealth from home. make that available to all of our clients and to those seeking our help. My first reaction to it was, well, it's better than nothing. But we quickly learned that it's a lot more than better than nothing. It's a lot better than nothing. I'm not going to pretend that it's the same or quite as good as in-person, face-to-face treatment, because I don't believe that. I think that there is something in the connection that we have when we're face-to-face in the same room together. And obviously through telehealth, you can't do that. But what we have learned is to use technology to our advantage. We have learned that we can make services available to people who might not ordinarily avail themselves of treatment in the office. And so in that sense, we've actually been able to reach a population that maybe we wouldn't have reached otherwise. Now, obviously, the primary or the most significant reason for the surge in the demand is a result of the incredible difficulty, the hurt, the pain, the isolation, the fear, the anxiety associated with the pandemic. But again, that's on top of what everybody might have been struggling with before. So if you were depressed before, this has made you more depressed in all likelihood. If you were anxious before, you're probably experiencing heightened anxiety. And if you were feeling lonely, you're probably feeling more isolated and alone now. And so it has exacerbated things that existed before the pandemic, in addition to those for whom the pandemic really represents, maybe not the only thing that they're struggling with, but the primary thing that they're struggling with. So we as professionals have had to adapt to be able to pivot, to provide services differently than perhaps we were trained to do, learn that and learn to be skillful at it in this most efficient and speedy way that we possibly could, and extend ourselves and the limits of our organizations to be able to handle an increased demand during this difficult period of time.
Thank you. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, there's so many people that have been struggling with this even before the pandemic who haven't reached out for help. So I think it's important to, try to tell these people, what are some of the indicators that you might need help. So could you let us know what are the predictable emotional responses to substantial change, trauma, and loss where you may want to seek help? Ellen?
Sure. I just do want to say that accepting and understanding that human feelings are part of who we are, and understanding the difference. I agree with what's within normal range of your feelings and when it stopped you from enjoying life and stopped you from moving forward. So the predictable feelings, and this is really helpful. So when people go through a loss or trauma, and mental health conditions or disorders are a loss of mental health, right? Or loss of finances, from death, dissolution of marriages, divorce, loss of jobs. All of that you have a certain predictable emotional human reaction. The first is shock and disbelief. And this is Kubler-Ross, basically. Oh my God, I don't believe it. It can't be happening. The second stage is and there's no time limit through the stages. And sometimes you go through more than one and you go back and forth. So there's, and when you have people struggling in the family, people go through these stages differently, and it sometimes creates tension. But understanding these and being acceptance of where people react differently, right? We're all human beings, including faith leaders, because they've been under a tremendous strain themselves, and they're human first. But so the first stage is shock and disbelief. The second one is anger, fear. What is anger? Anger is basically a secondary emotion most of the time that covers over fear, hurt, and just what is going to happen to me. I can't stand this. I don't know what this is. And frustration. I can't stand it. Take it away or stop this from happening. And then the other stages, which involves frequently religion, is bargaining. Please, dear God, I'll be good. I'll be good. Just take this away from my loved one or myself. Doesn't matter who it is. And then after that, a very important stage is sadness, is saying, okay, I got to let go of where I was, or that whatever the hopes and dreams are frequently, doesn't mean you can't have them. It means that you got to be the sadness and you can call it depression, you just sadness, and that will lead you eventually to acceptance. And acceptance means that I need to stay in the moment. I need to start dealing realistically with what is happening. And you know, and when you talk about look too far in the past and feel guilty, you can't change the past, right? So I say to people, try to stay in the present. And you don't know what the future is, so why waste all your aggravation and anxiety about worrying what will be? Let's try to figure out what you can control, what you can't control, and focus on what you can control. And this way it will at least make you feel not like a victim, but someone who can do something. And it's really very helpful, that feeling of being able to do something. And one last thing, staying in the moment also rests your brain many times. You know, that what they call mindfulness. And that's really important, because as we stay in stress, our immune system, this is my nursing part, our immune system gets weaker when the longer we're in stress. And then if you can take a few minutes, whether it be every day or every couple of days, to stay in the moment, whether it be yoga, meditation, and that's all coping, or just really walking in. Some people like shopping, so they look in stores, or having a good meal, or whatever that is for you. We're all unique, we're individuals, and that's the power of us, figuring out what we need. And so, and that will increase our immune system and calm our chemicals in our brain to make us feel better. Thank you.
I think Donna has a very unique perspective in regards to, you know, how to identify if something's wrong from a personal perspective, and, you know, how to do that first step. So Donna, can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to figure out that you needed help?
Well, I want to thank Ellen first for mentioning Kubler-Ross. That was actually instrumental in my understanding what was going on at the very beginning of my therapy. And I still go over the stages when I feel it coming in. For me, now I know what's coming, but then I was just totally confused and dismayed. My warning signs mostly are overwhelm, fear, inability to focus, not able to take care of your day-to-day life tasks. I had 2 little children at the time, and I was in and out of the hospital for about 2 years trying to find the right meds and the right treatment, and had to rely on family and friends to do that. And that, you know, makes you feel even more overwhelmed when you see how it affects your family as well. So what I try to do now is, when I feel it coming on, because I never want that to happen again, to get so deep where the walls come up, is just take a step back. I find relaxation in music, listening to, you know, old songs that I love, lighting a candle, taking a walk by myself, and just trying to chill out and, you know, take myself away from the day to day. And I've been lucky. It's been 30 years since my hospital situation, and I've been able to hold it together with the help of therapists, medication, family, and friends. So my plan is to just get that message out there. Don't wait as long as I did. If you know you're not right by the way you're feeling when you can't leave your bed or you don't eat and you isolate, get help. Find someone that you really feel you can trust and tell them that you're in trouble.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I think, you know, so many people struggle with getting help and knowing, you know, what the stages are, what are the signs that, you know, you should seek help now. Early intervention with so many issues, whether it be for your physical health or your mental health, you know, makes all the difference. So Dr. Smith, can you kind of speak to us about, you know, when should people get help? Like, what are the indicators? And, you know, obviously early is better, but, you know, I think help at any stage probably, you know, is beneficial. So can you just kind of give us a little overview of that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think it's really important that we all remember that we all can be helpers, right, in our own way. And we play a very special part in helping others to get to help and to accept help when they need it. So one of the first things I always suggest is when you're seeing someone that you're close to, or that you can see that there's something that's not quite right. You may not know what it is. You may not know how deeply affected they might be, but it's helpful to just ask, "How you doing?" Sometimes just hearing those words is enough to let someone feel like, first of all, it's okay if I'm not feeling so good. And there's nothing to be guilty about, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, that it's important to allow that to be expressed. And so I think I would recommend that as something that we all do and do more of. But certainly there are some signs, some symptoms that we can look at, and we can see if someone is, being more, and of course right now, as I said, we have to be isolated to some degree, but not completely. And so, but if someone is really shutting down and not engaging, that's obviously a sign that there's something that's not quite right. There's something else that's going on. Irritability. Someone may be more irritable than they typically would be. Again, that might be an indication that there is, a strong emotional reaction. As Ellen said, anger is a secondary symptom, if you will, generally of something that's underneath, something that maybe is not being expressed. So we see that with kids. Certainly, it's important to remember that children in all of this have been tremendously affected as well. And they may not have the words to be able to tell us what's troubling them. Again, we want to keep that door open. We want to ask how they're doing, but we want to also observe. And if we see changes, some of them are maybe very obvious. They're not able to get out of bed, or they, become more irritable and oppositional, or they become more shy and timid and withdrawn. So we see those kinds of things, and that would be an indication that perhaps they need some help. And so again, asking the question, "How are you doing?" Not in a judgmental way, but in a curious way and in a helpful way, can go a long way in helping people to recognize that it's okay. What as I said before, in the face of a tragic situation, in the case of a pandemic, it would be abnormal not to have strong emotional reactions. It's important also to remember for ourselves, for each of us, and for those that we care about, that it will get better. And we do need to communicate that as well. Maybe in the throes of this, you feel like this is going to be never ending, that life is never going to return to normal, that we're never going to be able to have the kind of joy and pleasures that perhaps we were able to have before. But that's not true. It can get better. And that's true not just of a pandemic, but of any other kind of situation or struggle that we may be faced with, whether it's the loss of a loved one, or loss of a job, or other things that rattle the foundation of our lives. It's important to remember that things can and will get better. We may have to get help to be able to have that occur, and that's okay. Help is available, and we want to be able to encourage those that need it to get the help that they need.
And I think that's a good question also for Donna to ask, how have people been able to reach out and offer help to you in a way that you were able to accept? And, was anything more helpful or something that wasn't helpful that, you might want to advise other people to do or not to do?
Well, there's a lot of things, Joanna, but the most helpful is to have someone supportive in your life. I went for many years with someone that was not supportive and actually pulled, the shaming thing about mental health. So it's important to know that mental health is an illness. And just like any other illness, you do go and get help. And to have someone in your corner is very important. And if you don't have someone, you should reach out to professional help. I think that's very important too, because you're really not alone. And I find talking to other people that go through it is very helpful to me. It gets me through. It's kind of, you're helping them, but you're helping yourself. And that's very, very rewarding, actually. If I see someone, I don't hesitate. If I feel something's off, I don't worry about boundaries. I'll just say, are you okay? And many times people have opened up to me, and we became, we developed friendships, and these people would go for treatment, and we became lifelong friends. Some of the best people I know were from when I was in the hospital, back on and off for those 2 years. And then years later, I worked in a shelter for quite a few years, and my children did too. And I found helping the people in the shelter was healing as well. So sometimes it's good to get out there and not think about yourself, but who else you can help, not fall into that big empty hole, in time before it's too late. So that's kind of, the way I go day to day. And I understand, like the doctor said, it does get better now, but when you're in the throes of it, you don't think it will get better. So you do need someone supportive. That's the biggest thing.
And I think also when you're in the throes of it, and like you mentioned, you feel that shame, it makes it very difficult. So can you kind of talk to us about that shame you felt and how you were able to break that stigma in order to get help?
It took me a long time, Joanna. I was married once before. My husband's now deceased. I am remarried, and thankfully I have a very supportive, wonderful partner. I don't know how I do it without him, but the man I was married to for many years would humiliate me and shame me, and actually call me a thing that I hated, expression. He would call me a mental case. And it broke my heart. And it really took away my self-esteem, and it held me back from getting help sooner than I did. I only sought help when I was at the point where I thought it was time to end it all. And then I realized I have these 2 little babies home. What's going to happen to them? And that's when I called my doctor, and she actually came in a cab to get me and put me into the hospital. And it's been a journey. That's 30 years ago. It was 1991 when this all started. But with years of the shaming, it was hard. I thankfully had my mom at that time, who was my biggest advocate. And now I have my husband, Richie, who is just amazing and so supportive. And I realized the difference in people can make a big difference in you. And having him here is a blessing.
Donna, and thank you for your strength and sharing your story. I mean, it's so hard, and the fact that you've been able to break through the stigma and really, advocate for yourself and others, you're making such a huge difference sharing your story. So thank you for that. I think the Reverend probably also comes across this idea of shame around mental illness. I know a lot of people, they first go to their religious communities because they don't feel comfortable yet going to a psychologist. So Reverend, can you kind of tell us, what you see when people come to you and the shame that's associated with mental illness?
Thank you. What Donna said and what the doctor said, the word shame kept being repeated over and over. And one of the things, especially within the African American community, is that no one wants to talk about someone having a mental illness and the stigma behind it. And I think that's, people don't want to say, I'm going through something. And it's sad to hear Donna say what she was called, but unfortunately, that's what happens in our community when people are ignorant of what mental illness is all about. And so sometimes I think later on we come to that question. I think for me, dealing with it as a pastor in a church, I had to also admit that to myself and to them, that it's all right to get help outside of the church. It's all right to go to someone and to a professional and let them sit down. And then you have to convince the family also. Sit down with the family and say, listen, what this person is what your son is going through, your daughter's going through, what you're going through, it's not demonic. It's not something that cannot, as doctor said, you can get better. But sometimes I think people won't come forward because of the label that's behind it. And so that becomes the difficult part about it. How do we get across that? It's just like having maybe cancer or it's having something that you can be treated for. And your community shouldn't shame you for it. And so I think for me, what's so important about this group, this panel here, is that we need to get the communities to understand what Donna was going through, what people, so that the community can be there also to support one another. And I think the pastors and the rabbis and all of us need to understand that it's not something that we should be ashamed of. We should tell the family not to be ashamed of what's going on, but try to get help for that person. So that's been a big battle within the church, is just letting them know you got to do more than just pray, get professional help.
Thank you for that, because I think there's so much, pressure on people, and the stigma still there, that it really keeps them silenced. And then sometimes it leads, we have a great question from the chat, sometimes it leads to self-medication, really trying to, medicate yourself and not get that help you need. Or maybe you've gotten help and then the medication you're supposed to be on, and then you try to do it yourself rather than keep on, getting that type of help that you need. So I was hoping, Dr. Smith, you can kind of talk to us about the cross-section of, mental health and substance abuse.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point. And the thing we have to remember about all drugs, right, is that they serve pretty much a similar function. All drugs aim to alleviate pain, to alleviate discomfort, to make you feel better, right? Now, that can take a lot of different forms, and different drugs act in different ways. But if you're depressed, there are certain drugs that you might find that might make you feel a little less depressed. You might find, if you're anxious, that if you take a certain drug or drink, that you feel less anxious. You might find that if you're feeling isolated and alone, there are certain drugs that make you feel more social. All of these drugs work. The problem is that drugs that are, not prescribed drugs, not drugs that are, designed and used by professionals to help you, but drugs that you might turn to on your own in an attempt to self-medicate without even realizing it. The problem is that those drugs, will have deleterious effects, that it's just a matter of time before that initial immediate relief of whatever the pain or the discomfort is replaced by greater pain and greater discomfort, and hence a need to go and do more self-medication and take more and more drugs. And of course, that can be lethal, that can be deadly. The bottom line is that drugs do work, and we can't pretend that they don't, because people know that they do. The thing is, we have to understand, and we have to educate, we have to make other resources available so that people who are suffering can get real help, not the kind of temporary and dangerous relief that turning to an illicit drug might bring. But there is a tremendous correlation between people who are struggling with any kind of emotional discomfort or pain and turning to substances to try to alleviate that pain. And as I said before, not necessarily knowingly, but it's something that they've learned through experience, that if I'm feeling this level of discomfort and I take this pill or I take this drink, that I'm going to feel less of that discomfort. But it is a slippery slope, and one that unfortunately too many people go down. And so it's important that we do the kind of education in schools. It's important that faith-based people, ministers, reverends, and rabbis and imams, that they, convey that message as well. That, turning to a drug is not the answer. That's not the solution. But rather, you're trying to do something to alleviate pain. But the way to alleviate pain is to seek professional help.
So as a friend or a family member who notices someone who's abusing substances, in order to help themselves, how do you approach them? How do you help these people? It's very slippery. It's a difficult issue to tackle or even address. So how would you recommend that someone who's caring and loving, address this person?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is that you want to try to point out the discontinuities, right? That, on the one hand, you want to feel better, right? You want to alleviate the pain, but the reality is, let's look at what happens, right? You have alienated people in your family. You may have suffered consequences by doing poorly in school. You may have had problems on the job. You may get into fights with people. Again, there are varying degrees to which substance use has led to negative outcomes. But, people don't necessarily connect the dots. They don't necessarily draw that line and recognize that the drug, which they've turned to self-medicate to help alleviate the pain, has actually created more problems, more pain, more suffering. And so pointing that out can sometimes, help someone to say, well, okay, maybe I need to try something different. And then sometimes it's, what I would say is going in kind of in the reverse direction. Just because the person is turned to substances doesn't mean that that's the only thing that needs to be addressed. The likelihood is that they turned to substances because there were other underlying issues and problems that were not being addressed, underlying depression or underlying anxiety or other emotional distress. The signs and symptoms of those need to be identified and need to then direct someone where they can get professional help for those issues and concerns. And if they address those issues and concerns, the dependency on drugs will diminish.
Can I jump in a couple of things I'd like to, Joanne, because there's a lot of stuff that went on here that I have a couple of words to say. First of all, one of the first signs, two of the first signs that happen is that somebody, a mental health condition disturbs your focus. So when somebody is either they're a student and they're not doing well, or their job and they can't keep a job, those are some of the first things. And also socialization. During COVID though, socialization, right, that's a little difficult to assess because we're not really doing a lot of connection or going to parties or whatever else you're doing. The other thing is that a firm belief we have is that when you understand that most of us on the panel grew up with mental health disorders being a character flaw. It is not. It is a biochemical disorder, just like diabetes, thyroid, asthma, and therefore frequently gets treated with medication, which will set sometimes those chemicals. But an integral part, which Dr. Smith said, was, therapy, speaking to somebody in a confidential way, in a place that's private, and that you have the right fit. Not every therapist and client is going to have the right fit. And if you find that you're not relating well, that trust issue, that fit is primary in getting good therapy. The other thing is that when you cannot take away substance use without treating the underlying mental health condition. Never go to a rehab that doesn't treat the mental health condition underneath. And what happens is, as you substitute healthy coping mechanisms for the unhealthy substance use, then you can probably, and that takes practice, takes work. But people like Donna are willing to do the work. And kudos to Donna, who kept on going, working at getting the right therapist, figuring out the right medication. It's not easy. And one of the things that we have to be realistic about is that medication and psychiatry is far behind the medical field because of Freud and Jung and all those people who made it a character flaw. And so when you take medications, we don't have a microscope in the head to see what medication is going to match which person. So for many people, after you have a diagnosis, and diagnoses are made from symptoms, there's not a blood test, there's not an EKG, there's not x-rays. So therefore, symptomatically, you look at, nobody's a diagnosis, right? We're a person who's dealing with symptoms and supporting someone to recognize, like Donna does, a symptom. I'm getting exhausted. I seem like I can't focus. That's the beginning sometimes of depression. And the coping is, what do I need? I need maybe to pull back from the stresses. I need to talk to my doctor about medication or my therapist. Those are really healthy things to do. But getting someone to that point and finding the right match of medication is complicated. So never, and when family recognizes, partners with, I know it's really tough, but I so appreciate that you're continuing to do this. Every community that I've spoken in, whether it be a Black, brown community, a Chinese community, Spanish, doesn't matter. Everybody's the same thing. Not in our community. We don't, want to recognize these things. And it's interesting because they say the same things in every community, and which means that we have a lot of work to do to really let people understand it's biochemical. The young people, I'm a school nurse currently, and the young people in schools and colleges, we're educating, very strongly and trying to put mental health conditions and disorders in schools we call conditions. It's a little softer than a disorder, to have that awareness, that education, that it's nobody's fault. It's something that as you get the support, you can really have the life you want, life worth living, but it takes work. Just like with diabetes, figuring out what food you need. When stress happens, your blood sugars go up. It's the same, it's not the same exact thing, but it's the same work and the learning process. And so my 3 Ps are perseverance, which family and people have, patience, which most family and people who are struggling don't have, and the third, which is really important, positivity. Look for someone's strengths. Don't call them, and don't be critical and judgmental. It doesn't belong in any relationship. Constructive criticism possibly, but certainly finding what they're doing well. And I see a lot of really strengths in so many people. And I so appreciate, the panel here and all the knowledge that they've given. So I said my 2 cents now.
Thank you.
Bursting, I had to say it. Thank you.
So important, because I think, you gave a really good overview of the 360-degree look. You have to look at all aspects of the person. And I think you had mentioned some coping mechanisms before, such as mindfulness. And, obviously it goes beyond just medication and therapy. It's really a day type of work at it, and your mental health, like you have to work at it every day. So I'm guessing there probably is some other coping mechanisms that you can share. Yes. In regard to mindfulness. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I just want to address one thing that is actually does interfere or can be helpful is the family. I just really have to say that a lot of times when, especially when you have a child or a spouse, it doesn't matter who it is, but particularly when you have a young adult child who's struggling, what do families, parents in particular, do? They want to jump in and fix, just like when the kid was a toddler. That's not helpful. You need, when somebody tries to figure it out themselves, they will be stronger. You're there as a safety net. And your anxiety you need to deal with and not put it on the person who's struggling. It's really, really important. And when I see our families who start learning these things, I see tremendous growth in the person who is struggling, also feeling, I have to figure this out myself. I am, and I'm not reacting to the anxiety and the upsetness of my family. They're letting me figure it out. And you'll have a much far stronger, resilient person going forward. And some of the coping things are doing things that are going to help you, whether it be running, exercise is huge. And my daughter tells me the telomeres, but it really is actually puts those good endorphins in you. Getting a good night's sleep. Sleep is one of the most helpful things that you can do. Have regular sleep patterns, which most young people don't have, but it's because there's, well, not now with COVID, but they want to be social. But regular sleep really, really changes our ability to cope. Stepping back when you need to, when there is a stressful situation, is huge. And because stress creates episodes, creates more mental health conditions. And so, all the things that in healthy living, a good diet, most people, it's hard to do, but, and being kind to yourself, being good to yourself, and not beating yourself up about every little thing. That's not helpful. Seeing what you can do, right? And most of us deal with anxiety. 1 in 3 people probably deal with a real mental health disorder, mood disorder. But actually looking when we're all anxious, anxiety is healthy, by the way. Do you don't mind if I just go into this a little bit? Anxiety is a human emotion. And without anxiety, we'd be risk takers, not a good thing. So anxiety tells us it's motivational. It tells us what we need to do. I have a test, I didn't study, I'm really nervous, I'm anxious. Well, I need to study, right? So it motivates us. When anxiety gets in the way and starts interfering with our ability to focus and to really enjoy life and move forward, that's when you need to really look at what is making you anxious, and that's in therapy generally, or with a good friend, but usually tools you need to develop. We're not born with those tools. They're tools that we learn. And so I'm gonna give somebody else a chance, but thank you.
I think the Reverend wanted to say something.
I also think that, and I thought you had mentioned it, when families see someone in their family going through something, they can't dismiss it. They have to step in and tell their son, their daughter, their husband, their wife that you need help, and not to close it off and say, you know, take this medication, you're going to get better. They need to be out there to say, okay, the signs that we're talking about, you need to recognize those signs and say, I'm going to get you help. And if they refuse help, you can't say, well, I don't want to lose my loved one and I won't push any further. I won't try to seek help for them, because then when something happens, you're going to hold yourself responsible or have this guilty feeling that I saw that she was going through, I saw that he was going through something, but I didn't want to become their enemy. So I just allowed it to happen and I didn't do anything about it. I didn't say anything about it. So I think one of the things that's really important that I'm learning from being part of the group, and when I was in the correction as an EAP officer, we were taught if someone called us and they said that they were going to commit suicide, my job wasn't to just try to keep, I needed to reach out to get them professional help, okay? Because it was out of my ballpark. I needed to, but at the same time, I had to say to myself, if I lose his friendship, he keeps his life. And so what we need to understand when we're dealing with mental illness, you help me, we need to be able to say, sometimes we might lose our loved one's friendship. We might, for a while, as doctors say, sooner or later, they'll realize that we had their best interest at heart. And I think that's what we need to be able to say to the community. You don't understand. Don't try to solve this by alcohol, by drugs. Get them professional help, and later on you'll feel better about it once they get where Donna is or Dr. Smith. Once they realize, you know what, I thought you were trying to hurt me, but I realized that you were trying to help me. And so that's so important here, that we need to understand that and teach our families and our friends. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, you're going through something. You're not going to seek help, but I'm going to try my best to get you help. Thank you.
And I think a lot of that also probably comes from the stigma that's associated with mental illness that's really created by society. And we have to kind of reframe the way society thinks in order for the individual to reframe the way they think. And I think both the Reverend and Dr. Smith have a unique perspective on this. So what can we do as a community society going forward? You know, how do we teach sections of society such as religious institutions, police departments, and schools on how to approach mental illness in order to destigmatize it?
I'll start, again, being a former correction officer, one of the things that they taught us, and I was looking at this, Joanna, the other day, they said care, custody, and control was what we learned in the academy. Care, custody, and control. As an officer, I did keep custody and I did keep control, but I wasn't able to care for those that were going through mental illness within the system because I was not able to recognize it. I think what we have to do within the police department, within the correction department, we have to make sure that within their training process, they're taught about mental illness. I think it would be a good idea if someone that was going through it be able to sit down and tell them. So this way, when a police officer arrives on a scene, he or she may be able to detect, well, you know what, this is how I need to handle this, rather than just to reach for their service revolver, which they're taught, because in a sense, they're taught really to protect society. And so if they see someone trying to hurt somebody and they don't realize that that person's going through, they're going to go to what they were taught from being in the academy, from their training. But if they can recognize some of the signs that we're trying to talk about tonight and be taught in the academy, maybe when they approach the situation, they can say, wait a minute, let us try to work with the situation, look at the situation from a different perspective. So I think it's about training, educating police officers, correction, all of those individuals, exactly what to look for. And I think we need to say, make that part of their training process. Okay, make that part of the training process. And also within the faith community, make it for those faith leaders to make it part of their training process, so that when we have someone that comes to our church, I had it happen in my church. A gentleman came in and he took his shirt off, and everybody wanted to run and hide. And then we're talking about in the church, well, love and it's everybody's open, but now that person needed someone just to say, are you okay? What's going on? And when I approached him, months later, he came to me and said, thank you for helping, for being there for me, because I was off my meds. Okay. And so that's important. We need the training. We need to teach one another. We need to be there. So I agree with you, Ellen, that we need to look at it from a different perspective. And I agree with Dr. Smith and Donna that about medication and reaching out. But how do we get that across to people? Because some people, I'm afraid, Dr. Smith, when I hear people say medication, take medication, sometimes people become so dependent on the medication that now the next thing they have a different problem because no one's telling them, how to medicate.
Right. I think that's, really important. But I think, as Ellen said earlier, what we know, the research that we know is that the best approach to treatment of any mental health disorders, that where medication is part of the picture, that it's part of the picture, it's part of the plan. It's not the whole thing. So that what we find in the treatment of depression, for example, and anxiety disorders is that the best combination is psychotherapy and medication. Because if you only attend to the medication, first of all, the person may start to feel better. And then, like the guy you were talking about before, I'm feeling better, I'll stop taking the medication. I don't need it anymore. I feel better. But of course, that doesn't really work out so well. And there can be a resumption of the symptoms that were problematic that the medication was helpful with. As Ellen said, also, we're not dealing with rocket science. Psychiatric medications were still only, maybe 50, 75 years, however long it's been, that we've really been, developing psychiatric medications and learning and trying to do a better and better job at being able to target brain receptors and be able to target things so that we can get the medication combination correct and the dosage correct. And it's different for each person. We're not all, robots. We're not, we're all individuals. And so, being able to engage in that process of combination of therapy and medication, I think is really, really important. The other thing that I wanted to say, is that I think that we need to be empowered. I think it's important that as a community, we are empowered. And one of the ways in which we can be empowered is to recognize that all of the things that the Reverend was saying that we need to train people in the correctional system, in the criminal justice system, educators, and mental health professionals, that we need training. We need resources to be available to provide that training, as well as to provide the services to the people so that when somebody needs help and they're willing and able to ask for help, that there's somebody there to answer the phone. But as a society, we have not invested enough in treatment, education, and prevention. And so oftentimes people will be seeking help, and unfortunately what they sometimes get is a busy signal or a waiting list. And we do everything in our organization to prevent that from happening. We very rarely have a waiting list of any length of time. But many, many organizations are not in a position to do that. And many parts of the state and parts of many communities, there is a lack of resources available. And so we need to be letting our community leaders, our politicians, our legislators, our governor, and other members of public service know that we need the resources to be available for people when they need help. And we need to invest in the systems that need to be educated to be able to identify problems, be able to engage individuals sufficiently to get them to the professionals that can provide the ongoing help and support that they need. So I guess what I'm doing is challenging everyone on this call to make your voices heard. If you believe that mental health is a serious issue and that there is a need in our society to address these issues, then you have to let the legislators, the people who represent us, you have to let them know that you care about it, and that you're going to make sure, you want to make sure that they do the right thing and support providing the necessary resources so that people can get help when they need it and want it.
I'd like to say something because NAMI does a lot of advocacy. We meet, I personally meet with our senators, New York State in particular, and our legislators. And what's going to be helpful is if you go and you talk to the person in the area in which you abide, where you live, because they'll listen to you far stronger than if I go, because your vote counts. Remember, there are they're about many things, but votes are important. So telling instead of saying general things, if you want to say a personal story, if you have it, and say, look, I went to the emergency room, they didn't admit me, or I was looking for a therapist and I can't afford what's out there. So, you need to change. And so we ask for the laws to be changed so that there is this mental health support. And it's very frustrating. Don't think you're alone out there. It is very frustrating that the system does not really support in the way it needs to. We're working on it. And as Joe said, I don't agree with 50 years. I think in the last 10 years, maybe there's been a lot more in research and progress in medications and stuff, and not even 10, maybe 5. But anyway, so, but the COVID, one thing I just want to add is that it's really brought out mental health challenges and conditions. And with our famous people, whether it be the sports people, our actors, and so many others coming out about it, what a help. What a help. Remember? And what Joe said was one thing that was really interesting, and as well as Pastor Green, when somebody would be lying there with a broken leg and they said, don't take me to the hospital, or they have cancer. Now, I don't want chemo. You would do what you need to do to get that person help. It is the same thing for mental health conditions. Don't think that I'm worried about them being angry. You need to save their life and or to get them help and support. And one last thing is that we do talk about suicide prevention in schools and all over. So you recognize the signs and symptoms. Sometimes there's none. So I don't want anybody to feel guilty. It's really important. And we do have a family surviving suicide loss. We do have a support group, which actually meets this Thursday morning. It's really important that we meet so many of the needs of families and people who are struggling, So.
Thank you. I think you made so many important points, especially the political point. We are in an election cycle, so reach out to these people that are up for election and tell them how important mental health is, and to get these programs in our society, because they are so needed and they need to be funded. And the only way to do that is through laws. So I think that's such an important point. I think also your point of, being there for people, especially when they're not making that first step to get help. Donna, I think you have a very unique perspective in terms of, like, what would you say to the person who's very hesitant to take that first step to get help?
I can tell you from a personal standpoint, I have a daughter that has addiction issues. And for a while we were tiptoeing, and then I realized this is just as bad as what I was going through. And we finally addressed it. And I guess we're 3 years now, where she's been sober, clean and sober. That's why I have my granddaughter. I want my daughter to recover, but we had to be honest with her. Actually, my son and I addressed it, and we just said, you need help. This little girl needs her mommy. And we all got together as a family, and we're making it hopefully become a reality again. And I've been proud of her, the way she's been handling it, actually. So that's how I would do it, the way I did it.
And we have another question from the audience, from Vance. He asked, what would you suggest to someone who might be reluctant to re-engage with society? And that's a question I actually had as well. As a mother of a young child who cannot be vaccinated, I have a lot of anxiety regarding the easing of COVID restrictions. And I'm sure other people are facing anxieties on various things as we return to, a society that's more normal, more pre-COVID. So can you discuss how our mental health may be impacted as we return to normalcy? Ellen, if you want to start.
So actually, I was funny, early in the program, I was thinking about that. It's not just during COVID, but it's actually going back into, right, seeing other people. Even without COVID, when you've been out of communication maybe in Zoom, but you've been out with without your social connections, when seeing people, everybody has some anxiety, some more than others. Oh my goodness, I got to see all the people and live and work with all the people I may like or may not like, right? And so you build up your coping mechanisms in that area. So and so with children, I think the schools are going to be doing, I don't know how old your child is, Joanna, if they're really a toddler, but going back and making sure, each of us have to choose what we're comfortable with. And so when you're ready, it's more about your comfort. If you have a young child, picking a place that that everybody's been vaccinated, and you take them there. Children react particularly to their parents' anxiety or calmness. And so no matter how you feel, if you can try to do it do the research, feel like you're more uncomfortable, and getting back into society is going to be at each person's comfort, and certainly probably slowly, I would assume, but making sure that where you're working or where you're going to school is doing what you need to do to feel safe.
Yeah, I think that the more that you can feel confident that you're doing it gradually, you're doing it in a safe way, in a responsible way, you're educated about what the science tells us, and the more that you can feel confidence, the more you're going to allow yourself to return. I think, and to allow your child, at whatever age, to be able to, in appropriate ways, re-engage. I think that, a couple of things. One is that we have a lot of strengths, right? We all do. And no matter what we may be struggling with emotionally, we still have strengths. And we have to be focused on that. People have to, hopefully professionals and as well as friends and relatives can help us to identify our own strengths. We've gone through crises before. We've gone through difficult situations. We've somehow managed to get through it. We've somehow managed to get better. We've somehow managed to move on. And so to remember those things and to identify those strengths, I think is really very important. But it is a gradual process, and everybody is going to experience their trepidations about the future in their own way and in their own time. And it's not as if there's only one way to do it. But I think that, it is important to remember that we convey, again, Ellen, you said it well, that children will pick up on the cues that they receive primarily from their parents, but all of their loved ones. Right? So that if we're overly anxious, likelihood is the child is going to be more anxious. If we can have more calm and feel more confidence, the child will feel calmer and will feel more confident. And remember, the natural thing for most of us is to affiliate. Again, to be human means to be interactive on some level with other humans. That's part of the human motivation, part of what makes us who we are. And so I think there is a natural tendency. I think we have to sometimes, help to facilitate that. And if somebody is having a real hard time with that, again, that's an indicator that some professional help might be necessary.
Absolutely. And at this point, I also want to introduce Aisha Gordon. She is Loison's wife. She's actually a social worker, and I think she would have some interesting perspective on this question as well, especially involving children. She has a son. So hi, Aisha. Thank you for joining.
Hi. Like Joanna has said, I've been a social worker for over 17 years with an LMSW for 10, and I predominantly have experience with adolescents, but now I work with adults with multiple diagnoses. And I just feel what the panel's been discussing is the stigma, that we need to get rid of this stigma and normalize this mental illness and issues going on. I feel that with the lack of family supports, that also influences the level of care they receive at any given point, not getting a good view, and the quality of medical care would definitely go up with the family supports, I believe. And what the panelists have discussed with the COVID and disruption of normal routine, isolation, financial stressors, I'm seeing more and more severe cases, especially more that are suicidal. And I just feel like getting an early diagnosis is best for treatment. And definitely a nice marriage between therapy and medicine is definitely beneficial to assist.
Thank you, Aisha. We have another question, and please stay on because you might have some valuable input as well. How do you make a safe space for friends who may need you in a deeper way?
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat it?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. How do you make a safe space for friends who may need you in a deeper way?
Who are you asking?
Everyone, just chime in. It's a free-for-all.
So can I just say something? It's always very helpful to asking someone what they need, whether they're struggling with a mental health condition or anything else. Tell me, because we don't know what other people need, including people in our family. So I always say, ask. People forget. Should I do this? Should I say that? I say what will be helpful? Easy words. I'm an easy word person. What will be helpful? What can I do to help? And people will tell you if they know. Sometimes they may want to think about it because they may not know on the top of their head, and that's fine. Remember that patience part? So you have friends and you want to have a safe space. What will make you comfortable? We just had that actually on our New York State NAMI conversation about going back to the office and what's going to be the protocol and what's going to make people feel safe. So it's a conversation I think that everybody has, particularly as we go forward, and always discussing and checking in with people. What do you need? What would help?
I think it's also important to keep in mind that we can be helpful up to a point, but we do have to maintain a recognition that we have our limits, right? So you want to make a safe space for people that you care about, that you love. But part of what makes it safe is that you are not going to be so overwhelmed and so overtaken by their pain that you become immobilized yourself. And so it's important to know that you have, you want to help and you can make space available, but when it reaches a certain point, you have to set certain limits, right? And knowing that there are professionals that are available is really important, because you want to be able to help the individual as a friend, as a relative, as a loved one, but you want to really help them ultimately getting to the place that can help them the most, if they need it. If the level of need, is beyond what, a friendship might be able to be enough for, then you want to be able to make sure that you know that, and that you know what your limits are, and that you can help to get them to the place or to the individuals that can really help them professionally.
I just want to add a couple of things. What Dr. Smith said between sympathy and empathy, that's what he spoke about. You feeling too much versus being helpful in empathy. And as a nurse at the very beginning of our education is you're not helpful when you're sympathy. You're feeling too much. You're connecting overly, and it makes you paralyzed and not helpful. Empathy is understanding how somebody feels so you can support and help them. And the other thing is that he also said was fair, reasonable boundaries. Remember, one of the things that we forget is that fair, reasonable boundaries and limits make people feel safe. Not knowing what the limits and boundaries are creates anxiety. So thank you. Very helpful.
Also, another two-part question. So Reverend, did you have something to add? Because I think you had something.
Ellen hit it, and Dr. Smith, we always make sure you have boundaries, okay? And you have to set up boundaries. And I think also just allowing someone to express themselves, to sit down and say, I'm going to listen to you. I think that creates a safe space when they know that you're taking the time to listen to them. Or sometimes turn off. I'm just going to listen to you. I'm not going to do anything else. And I think that makes them feel I can share with you, but you do have to have boundaries, because you don't want to walk away now attached to their problem, and you have a problem, and everybody's confused. Everybody's going through something. And as Dr. Smith, now I'm taking medication for something that somebody brought to me. Okay. So I think it's important to make sure you have boundaries, but also make the person realize, I think Dr. Smith, make the person, if I want to help you, but if it's outside of my boundaries, I'm going to get you additional help. And do you trust me enough? Do you trust me enough to do that for you? Because that's why you came to me in the first place, to help you. But now I reached my spot. I'm going to reach out to someone else to get you help.
One of the questions that has come up again and again tonight, and always does, is, how do you get someone to accept help? Right? Sometimes we may know a person needs help, but they may not be ready to get it, or they may not be willing to take that next step. And that's terribly frustrating and hard, right? But one of the things that I will often say to people, sometimes, I'll be seeing patients individually for a period of time, and I'll say, maybe you need to be thinking about a higher level of care. Maybe you need to be in the hospital right now, or maybe you need to be in a day program, or you need to be, youngsters maybe need to be in a residential treatment setting. And no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. And one of the things that I found that has really been helpful is to work with that individual and say, all right, look, we're going to try to do some work, individually together. But let's talk about what are going to be the signs, what are going to be the indicators to you and to me that this isn't sufficient, that something else might be necessary. And we talk about that. We identify things. Well, I guess if I can't go to work in the morning, that's a real problem, or if I get into fights with people, maybe that's a problem. Or, maybe I just can't get out of bed. That would be an indicator, right? So we talk about those things. And then if those things should happen, because look, I'm not a magician. I don't know everything, right? So maybe it will work just fine, right, to stay with this level of care. But if it doesn't, if those indicators emerge, we've talked about it, we can remind ourselves, right? Okay, you remember we talked about that? If this happens, or if that happens, or if the other thing happens, that's an indicator that something else is needed, right? And I found that that's been very, very helpful, and that individuals who initially may have been resistant to doing certain things that would be helpful for them begin to recognize that, okay, I tried that didn't work. Ellen said it also, about a match, a fit. Sometimes there are individuals who you go to for help and it just doesn't work, doesn't gel. That's okay. We can find somebody else, right? That there are other providers who are out there who maybe there is a better fit with. So, it's a process. There's no magic bullet. There's nothing that we can turn to and say, this is always going to work. This is what always has to happen. It's just not like that. We have to go with the experience. Sometimes that's frustrating. We have to persevere. We have to be patient because we have a lot at stake, and it needs that kind of perseverance and that kind of patience.
By the way, Dr. Smith talks about his clients or his patients. Yes. And I deal with the families who can't get the person to many times to the help. And that's where, a lot of times with the education and stuff or our support groups, which are very supportive. But I chuckle because I love that the relationship of what you were talking about is wonderful. If you can have, if you can get somebody and have that relationship with a therapist, and that's really the ultimate. So thank you. It's a nice example.
Thank you. So we have one last question, and then we'll go to closing remarks from each of our panelists. So going back to the pandemic, can we look and can you tell us what would be some of the long-term outcomes, mental health outcomes resulting from this this pandemic? Sorry. So the mental health outcomes resulting from the pandemic, and what lessons have we learned from this? Whoever wants to go.
You know, I think that I'm going to cite two things. One is positive and one is not so positive, right? You know, on the one hand, I think that what we will find as an outcome from all of this is that there will be hopefully greater recognition that, you know, distress is something that we all experience, and that we experience it in our own inimitable fashion. But we all struggle when faced with tragedy, when faced with loss, when faced with fear and scary situations. We all will struggle with that, but it does get better. And I think one of the things that we'll learn is that, you know, we are resilient, and that we can get better. On the other hand, I think that one of the things that we're going to learn is that we really do have limited resources when we need to have massive resources. And I think that that's going to become even more profound. You know, Ellen, you talked about how it's hard to get someone to find someone to be able to work with them, to help them, because there's limited resources that are out there. Well, the demand for help is going to be profoundly greater. We're already experiencing it. And one of the things that we know from research that's been done after every disaster that we've faced, and there's never been a disaster of this monumental, pandemic, but every research that we've seen is that post-disaster, there is a surge in the demand for help. And whether we were talking about 9/11, or we're talking about Hurricane Sandy, or we're talking about Oklahoma City, you know, or we're talking about any of the disasters that we've experienced in recent times, the research has demonstrated time and time again that within months of the disaster, the surge in demand is incredibly great and lasts for years. Now, that's on disasters that we've experienced in the past that were terrible, horrific experiences. But has there ever been anything quite like this? Anything of this monumental experience, that universal experience? So we can only imagine what the demand is going to be in the years to come. And unless we, again, I'm challenging all of us, unless we ensure by making our voices heard that the need for the resources is great and is going to be greater, and that it's the responsibility of our elected officials to provide those resources. You know, sometimes we've talked about fighting this pandemic as if it were a war. Well, that's true. Maybe it is like a war. But when you're faced with a war, you don't ask how much does it cost to fight and to win that war. You just do it. You do what you have to do. And as a society, that's what we need to do. We need to say that part of the effect of this pandemic, part of the collateral damage of this pandemic is emotional distress that requires a severe and significant response that can help, that can make a difference, that can allow people to get from the tragedy to recovery. And recovery is possible because we are resilient, but we need the resources and the help to be able to make that happen.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It would be great if you all had closing remarks or like one point that you want people to like really resonate with them.
Do you want me to start?
Yes, please.
All right.
So
So one of the very important things is to acknowledge your feelings, acknowledge that, and we're entitled to our feelings. Feelings are not bad. They're not our enemy. Remember that. And figuring out what you need to do to help yourself through it if you need it, or if it's overwhelming, you need to seek help. I take crisis calls all the time from NAMI, and there's a lot to be done, but anybody's welcome to come into our groups, again, because sometimes that connection, that you're not alone, right? Other people are struggling, and people have a right to either share or not share in public, you know, or to a friend. So just remember that and be kind to yourself and figure out what you need. And again, your feelings are not your enemy, and you're allowed to have them. We all have them. We're human. So thank you.
I was going to say the same thing, sort of that Ellen said. By getting help, acknowledging your feelings, your hurts, the state that you're going through, whether you're depressed, to share it with somebody. And I think this group, being a part of it, makes us realize that we're a circle. We need each other. And as long as we realize that we're a circle and we need each other, those gaps that are broken in the circle, let's fill them in. If it's with our politicians, we need to fill those in, and we can make this circle without any gaps, without any holes in it. I think we can help one another. So what I would want everybody to take out of this tonight is sort of to speak that when, from my perspective, from the religious community, from the doctor's perspective, from Donna's perspective, that, you know what, we still need each other. We need each other, and we need to share, and we can have these kind of sessions where we can share. Maybe we can walk away from this and say, you know what, we're one. We're one in humanity. We're one, and we need to care about everybody. So that would, I would want everybody to take away. We're a circle, and we need each other.
Joanna,
You're
would you
muted.
like to go next?
Yes, it's my hope that with all the help that we've been given tonight from the panelists and from Joanna and Loy, that if there's anybody at all listening in, if they feel they need help or know of someone that needs help, this would be the time to do it. Don't hesitate. And even if we saved 1 or 2 people through this, it makes it so worthwhile. So that's my hope, that we reached you.
And Aisha, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I just want people to know that there's people out there as support systems, and to have that open space and safe space for anyone who's going through some challenging times, and to just be there, be a friend, be a loved one, because it is difficult. Depression is not easy, anxiety, any of the ailments, and it's just like anything else. Like Ellen said, it's like diabetes. It's like any other physical ailment.
Thank you. And Dr. Smith?
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, recap some of what was said already, but I support it entirely. I think this kind of panel, this kind of discussion tonight, coming together and talking about these critical issues is really, really important. I want to thank you, for the opportunity to be a part of this. I think it's terrific. I think a lot of good things were talked about, and a lot of good ideas there on the table. And again, I would encourage, just as Aisha did, those who at any point, feel the need for help or know someone who needs help, do what you can to try to get to the resources that can be helpful. There are resources available, not enough of them. And it may be frustrating, as Ellen said, to navigate the path. But ultimately, if you persevere and if you, you really stay with it, you can get the help that you need, and recovery can occur. So I just want to end, from my point of view, with that hopeful statement that it takes one good deed to change the world, and we can do it. Right? We can do it as individuals, change our own world. We can do it as a community. We can do it as a country. We can do it as the world. As the Reverend said, we can be one. So I encourage everyone, again, speak out, make your voices heard, let the politicians know that we need to focus on this issue, and we need to make sure the resources are available on every level to provide the help that's needed for those that need it.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank the whole panel and Aisha for joining for the Q&A. Thank you all so much for joining us and sharing your valuable time. Everyone who's listening, in the chat is all the contact information for all our panelists. Please reach out or share with anyone that you think could use some help. We're here, we want to help. That's why we did this event. And thank you for participating. And again, thank you to all our panelists for sharing your knowledge with us and your wisdom. It's so greatly appreciated. And we hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Joanna.